politics. My guests tonight, as I had informed you earlier, Ishmael Nyaribo, an advocate of the High Court, Beatrice Elachi, Mheshimiwa, the Honorable Member of Parliament for Dagoretti North, as well as Joshua Kiptoo, the former Speaker in the Nandi County Assembly and an advocate of the High Court. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for staying with us. Ishmael, you were saying earlier on it was quite a hurried situation.
Yeah.
Ideally, what would the Constitution, what would be the remedy that, you faulted the Honourable House? What would rather have happened?
You see, I've had my learned friend, Mr. Kiptoo, say that this is purely, or rather, it's largely a political process. And I agree entirely. But the political process is being done in public space. Part of it is public participation, that is public space. Part of it is standing orders. Those are the procedures in Parliament. But let me tell you this, that there is nothing that happens in void the Constitution of Kenya. There is nothing that happens which is not captured in the protection of the people of Kenya through the Constitution and, of course, other legislation. So, if members of Parliament, the National Assembly feels that we can do what we want to do, and by the way, you heard today the Senate Speaker reading, a ruling, then referring to several decisions of the Senate itself and also of the Court of Appeal. What does that tell you? There is no arm of government that operates in isolation. So, if the National Assembly decides to box somebody into a corner and assume that he has to answer us in 2 hours, and the National Assembly thinks that 2 hours is good, we have not spoken, we have given him all the time, that will not fall well. That will not go down well with the Article 50 of the Constitution that demands for fair trial. So, without necessarily predicting what will happen in the Senate, really, the Senate has demonstrated, like the former speaker has said, that they have that experience of having tried several impeachments, from the counties. So they have that knowledge. And one of the exceptional knowledge they have developed is that of giving the accused, the person in trial, a chance to explain himself. And now, what are you supposed to explain yourself to? That is where the National Assembly actually failed. The National Assembly came together, they collected 291 signatures the previous day, then they rushed public participation on Friday. They realized it was not enough, so again on Saturday they again extended it. The Seventh-day Adventists said, oh, that was Sabbath, we were not given enough time, and you've seen now, some of their members have gone to court. So these are all issues that the Senate must look at. Was the process regular? Was it procedural as per the Constitution of Kenya? By the way, if it was not regular, if it was not procedural, it will not be a constitutional process. And that's why you see several people have gone to the High Court to say, even before you really take this motion up to the Senate, look, the procedures used are actually strange to the Constitution of Kenya, so can we have it stopped? By the way, the High Court can stop that process. They are not stopping the Senate from entertaining the matter, but they are telling the Senate that the process being used is actually irregular already. Much as it is rather political, we have to guard and guide the Constitution. We have to, people must operate in a certain known highway, not in a strange highway. So whether you are members of Parliament, by the way, the judiciary itself cannot operate outside the Constitution. So the whole point here is that the people must be allowed to be sovereign. Their document that is supporting their operations must be respected. And so the courts, to that extent of saying the procedure used, because the National Assembly procedure is completed. It doesn't exist anymore. They have already made a ruling and they have said this must go up to the upper chamber so that it can be tried. So this can be handled at its level.
Okay.
But so my point is that we cannot, whether it is a political process, whether it is a spiritual church process, whether whatever you call it, shakahola, or whatever you are in church, or we have a right to tell the people what we want to tell them, the Constitution always comes at play.
Okay. Mheshimiwa Beatrice, this National Assembly has really been on the receiving end on, how it is conducting itself. Even, when Wakili here talks about the supposed hurried public participation. Do you think it is an indictment on the Honorable House?
Well, first of all, and that is why Article 50 was removed. You see, if we follow just to the latter, Article 150, we don't even need to be speaking about the courts or the process, because the process is well stipulated, and how many days you're supposed to do this process, and how it's supposed to leave your chamber to go. You have only 7 days. You finish, you take it to the Senate. It's very clear. But because in Kenya, I know everyone will wish to have them, especially the lawyers, like we did the constitution for lawyers in this country. So they define it in the way they would wish it suits me. It is not even supposed to go to court in real sense.
Okay.
And that is why it doesn't even have IEBC. So why are we not questioning? Why are the lawyers not saying, in fact, we need an IEBC? Why? Because they know by law they knew the moment you finish it, it goes back, it comes back to the National Assembly, and the president appoints the nominee, you approve the nominee, and you give him. The reasons they knew very well, the experts, that is how it's done all over the world. And so they picked exactly how the US impeachment is done, and they just brought it in 150. Now we must accept that we borrowed. And so all these things that we didn't do well, now the next thing I'll always ask, which the courts have never even explained to Kenyans, what is a threshold of public participation? Is it the numbers? Is it the people? Is it the documentation you give? What is the threshold? And until we get a law of public participation is when you can stand firm and say, so the threshold of public participation in impeachment is this, and of these others are this. How does a county assembly remove a governor?
So according to you, the public participation was done correctly?
Well, what is the threshold? I would wish the media to tell us. What is the threshold? What are we supposed... I don't know. That's why I'm saying you have done public participation. People came. Is that what we call... Is that what Kenyans say is a threshold? Is that what the courts are saying is a threshold?
So why did you go for this public participation?
Exactly. The court said you do, and the Constitution says it's only that we must put in a law, so that you put in all those things, so that you are able to now say, yes, there was, based on threshold, just the same way today's Senate did with the Kericho case. The threshold was this. There's no half a person, there's no quarter person, there's no, you can't. It's a person. That's how they were able to say, look, there was no threshold. And that is a few questions we're asking. But for me, we are in a learning process. Even the lawyers, they don't know. Where have they seen impeachment? And so they will come and now tell us on this screen, this is the time we are now testing Article 150 of the Constitution of Kenya. Even the lawyers should be also researching and not telling us. You should be telling us how it was done in the US during those times when we had the Nixons and all this, even just the recent one of Trump. How did it flop that it did not go through and all that? I wish one of those lawyers would come out and tell us, this is how we are thinking. But for me, the process we have done, all these questions, how I wish we waited for the Senate to now do their part and say, after that, is when you can question whether we have done justice to the deputy president, where we've given him fair administrative justice or not. But you see now when you question the National Assembly, and there's no place, the National Assembly, the law, the framework that we were given in the Constitution says you have to question him, you have to ask, he can question so-and-so, or question even the mover. There's no place. You are told you must hear him in silence. And that's what they gave him.
So I think Maringa, Honorable Elachi is also not mentioning that there's a bill. There's a proposed bill on the public participation.
Yes,
but even without that bill, if you look at the reasoning of the courts on the matters that have been decided by the High Court in terms of what is at the moment considered to be sufficient public participation, reasonable time,
Okay.
Reasonable time has always been repeated, and the goodwill in terms of if you are calling people within Dagoretti North.
What is reasonable time?
Dagoretti North to do public participation, isn't it?
Let's bring in Joshua.
I mean, you cannot tell people in the morning and in the evening you are telling them we have the answers, and then you go to Parliament and the public participation is on a Sunday, and then it's extended to Saturday, and on Monday you have collected and summarized all the 47 counties, and then on Tuesday you are saying you're actually giving a report.
Really, my senior should tell me. As he comes in, my senior should tell me two things.
Yeah.
The question was either yes or no.
No. Oh, okay.
So I'm wondering how you'll sit in a hall and question that and say you need 7 days to ask yes or no.
Joshua,
I'm wondering.
Yes. Allow me then to speak. I think they have had their time.
Yes.
So number one, I would want to take us back to understand the concept of public participation. Where did it come from and what was the idea behind public participation? Leaders are elected, and that's why I have my former colleague and our current MP, my MP, Dagoretti, Honorable Beatrice Elachi. The meeting point between Mheshimiwa and the constituents primarily is at the time of election, when she was being elected, where she had to do a lot of campaign and then gets elected. Once she gets elected, she settles into her respective position and has to discharge her mandate in terms of representation and legislation. But there's always that question that used to arise. Where then do we have the input of the public towards Mheshimiwa's work, which is legislation? And importantly, the core of her work being representation. Where is the voice of the people? That is where, in the constitution we have, public participation became a constitutional issue to be considered. Now, once you understand that philosophy, the idea is basically to try to bring on board the views and wishes of the people. Basically have a feel and say, what do people think about this? What then becomes is a leader or an institution, whether a legislative institution or even a government institution, because public participation is not just for the legislature, even the executive. And that's why you've seen the courts quashing so many administrative actions or pieces of legislation for lack of public participation, because they say, what is the input of the people? Now, let's now come to the process, which now becomes the point of debate. What is the threshold? And I think county governments offer the best lesson, so far so good. Compared to the national government, county governments are the front line when it comes to public participation. And the experience of county governments is that the reason why devolution was made was government to go closer to the people, where there is that nexus between the wishes of the people and the real-time governance they see, they feel. And that's where public participation has been more or less practiced and effected over a period of time. Every small step of the way, there must be those forums, whether you are doing community halls, and public participation is not just the aspect of one-on-one town hall meetings. It can go to the extent of people writing petitions, people writing memorandums. There are several aspects of it. So when it comes to threshold, I feel it's more of a moving target, and the courts help on matters interpretation. Let us get it clear. I think we keep blaming one arm against the other, yet we forget they are interdependent. The role of the court is to interpret the law that is already there. They don't legislate. So the court would say threshold in terms of the laws you've already done. And in this case, let me use this case, and that's why I wanted to disagree a bit with my senior Nyaribo.
Yes.
The idea of doing the public participation on Saturday came from the courts itself. Because they set the threshold. They said, if you do at the county level, it may not be representative enough. Why? The logistics of getting the voice of the county people under one. If, for example, you're doing in Nandi, how are you able to get 6 constituency people from the far ends all the way to Kapsabet to give their views within that period of time? Let me assume 1,000 people show up. Will they have reasonable time to give? Then the court saw it fit to decentralize and say, let us go at the constituency, because what is the threshold? An MP is the sole voter in parliament over this impeachment. So let this MP face his or her constituents, get their voice, then apply it. For me, that threshold meant at least you've spread it out more. Now, when it comes to question of timing, it is not done in isolation. It is done together with the threshold or not, in accordance with the timeline set within which this process must conclude. And Parliament was time-bound over a number of days. So you have to squeeze in between and try get as much as possible. Lastly, which is more important, when it comes to the Senate, this question of public participation coming to the fore, I've realized there's another argument that is still hanging in the sense that were people sensitized enough about the process? And that's why Beatrice Elachi said it was a yes and no question. Now, for me, I felt that the answer to that would have been, as at the time they were opening those town halls and starting those sessions, they would have done 2 hours of explaining the charges, explaining the provisions of the law, and explaining that decision. You see the way we do voter education? You tell the voter, when you tick and say, I approve. So as long as Parliament can confirm tomorrow at the trial chamber that we were able to do first 2 hours, educated the people, then you tell them, make decisions. That's it.
Okay.
So they did
so civic
We
education.
did at BAMBA so well. And I did in my constituency so well.
Just as I finished then, so at the end of the day, and that's why I was saying it's more of a political process. I'm focused on the outcome. The courts will play their role. I just disagree with Beatrice Elachi on one point.
Let's take a break.
Let me just finish this because it's very important.
Okay.
There's a comment people made. They said, what is the role of IBC? Trust me, IBC will have a role in terms of gazettement.
Okay.
Number 2, what is the role of courts? Speaker Kingi has clearly said you cannot inject them in their legislative work, but court can administratively review the decision. So the courts will still have its say. So you can't oust its jurisdiction.
Hold that, ladies and gentlemen. That we take a break because the director is on my case. Then we come back and continue because this discussion is just getting started. Keep your questions, feedback and comments coming. We are coming back in a short while you're watching The Daily Report with me, George Maringa. Orodo Nyamai is on sign language interpretation to stay with us.